Hello and welcome back to the channel, ladies and gentlemen. Today we have another red dot sight from MidTen Optics. If you're familiar with my channel, MidTen sent me their really tiny little red dot, similar to a TR25, probably about a year or so ago, and it was like a $35 red dot. And it worked as well as a $35 red dot would. I actually have it on my airsoft gun. I've beaten it up quite a bit, and you know what? It just keeps on working. So for $35, that was a pretty good investment. Henry over at MidTen actually sent me an email a couple weeks ago asking me if I'd be interested in reviewing more of their products. So, of course, I said yes. This time it is not a regular pick-mounted red dot sight. No, this is actually a pistol-mounted red dot sight, which also comes with a pick rail adapter. With the box on its side, you could already get a glimpse of what this thing has to offer. The side-loading CR2032 battery is a nice touch, and the 50,000 hours claimed battery life is in the middle range of its brightness settings. But we'll take a look and confirm that in the instructions very soon. The box itself is pretty bland, and that's perfectly fine, because you don't need a whole lot for a tiny little red dot sight like this. We're going to flip through this together really quick, and make sure we don't miss anything. That is the majority of how this thing is going to be used. 11 brightness settings, press either button to turn on, powering off the sight, press and hold for 3 seconds, either button. The sight will also automatically go to sleep after 4 minutes of inactivity. After 4 hours of inactivity, the sight will power down completely. Let's hold up right there for just one moment. I actually emailed MidTen about that, and they said not to worry about it. It was a misprint on their end with the instructions. So I decided to put that to the test on numerous occasions, and just so happened to catch one on video for you guys to enjoy. Alright, this has been sitting all night. I just woke up. Let's see. As you can see, there is no dot. They say there's only 4 hours before this thing shuts off. There's the dot. Cool. You don't have to worry about this thing not turning back on when it goes to sleep. So with that question debunked, let's get back to the review. The last important piece of information is each click adjustment is 1 MOA. So your $175 gets you a cleaning cloth, gets you some extra screws, gets you a little Torx tool, gets you a mounting plate, which is nice. If you didn't realize what it said on the side of the box, this is for an RMR footprint, so that is good to know. Your pick rail adapter with a very interesting thumb screw. Not the craziest, but you know what? I'm sure it's going to be fine. But the one thing is, this is already going to be on the right-hand side, which is not a personal preference of mine. I prefer them on the left-hand side, either running a bolt action or even most semi-automatics. I don't like anything that's going to possibly interfere with the bolt. And here we are. As you can see, it gets shipped in a neoprene cover, which does slip on this thing, hold on, quite tightly, which is nice to see. Initial impressions on this are the weight feels pretty substantial for what this thing is, but we'll take a look at that very soon. You'll note that the bottom does have this, it looks like silicone. It is a little soft. You can see a little bit of a nail impression right there, but it is nice and even, and it is, of course, lower than the mounting plate on the bottom. To see how this is going to mount up with your adapter plate, you can see there is a little bit more wiggle there than I would like to see on both plates. If you're wondering what this is going to look like, it's going to look exactly like that. A little bit more wiggle than I'd like to see. But the nice thing is, because the battery is on the side, if you ever do have to replace it, you shouldn't have to remove this. The screws are provided to mount this thing up however you would like, and I do recommend blue Loctite. Now, focusing our attention on the optic itself, the first thing I want to address is the weight. So this optic comes in at 1.4-ish ounces on my scale. My scale is not calibrated, so it could be off a fair amount, but so far everything I've seen, it's pretty close, within like 10% or so. The only other two optics that I have that are somewhat comparable to this are the Vortex Viper. I have to put the battery on the side because bottom mount batteries usually fall out whenever you take them off. You can see this is 0.4 of an ounce lighter, which is substantial. And the same thing can be said for the PA Classic 24mm, which actually comes in a little bit lighter still. These are, now the primary arms option is less expensive, but not by much. But the Viper is right along the same price point as this. Now, honestly, the main concern I have with something like this isn't necessarily it working, but just the warranty. I'm a guy that likes to know that if my product breaks or gets destroyed, whether by normal wear and tear or by, sheer accident, let's say you put this on your pistol and you accidentally hit into a barricade or something and it cracks the glass or misplaces the glass or the illumination just dies on you, it's nice to know that you have a good warranty to back you up. Both the other two options I already showed you basically have some of the best warranties in the business. MidTen claims that they have a very similar warranty, but I haven't had to test that out, and hopefully I don't have to. The first thing I want to actually take a look at is under the battery cover, because some battery covers are not made to the same standard. You have these two little tiny screws that hold this little door on. You can see right there at the bottom there is a little like fingernail groove, but my fingernails I usually try to keep cut. There is a nice big rubber O-ring. Well, it's not an O-ring, it's more like a square D-ring, but there is a big seal right at the base, and that is how the battery is held in. So this isn't anything fancy. It's not like the Holosun doors where it actually has a nice little lip where the battery locks in. It's just two little, my point exactly, it's just got two little fingers that come out and sort of just shift the battery in and out. Now, this is not the end of the world, primarily because the battery should go in there like that and still function. This is here just for weather sealing and to extract the battery a little bit easier. The one thing is, though, with the weather sealing, you only have these two little screws on top, and the seal goes all the way around. I'd be mostly worried about water egress getting in here from the bottom if there isn't enough tension. See if this will slide in, and it does. If there isn't enough tension on those screws, you can see how the bottom part over here already looks like it's camming out a little bit. So that would be my only concern, is having these screws back out and then having water get inside here and frying it.
Freeze it. All right, let's actually see if that door holds back water. I decided to test this out while I was in the middle of filming a little segment, so that's why the pick rail is mounted. As you can clearly see, the optic is on and working just fine. I'm throwing it inside of an old Talenti jar because I use them for more than just holding ice cream when you first buy it, or gelato, whatever you want to, however specific you want to be. But you can see that it is working perfectly fine. My watch to the right is there to prove to you guys that when I do the time jump, it's actually been a certain amount of time, not that I just threw it in there, freezed it, and then pulled it out 6 seconds later. So, let's see if this thing actually holds up. Because 10 minutes has expired, the dot had shut off, so I gently tap the container to see if it will turn on automatically, which it does at the far right edge of the glass looking through it. So we already know that it's going to work just fine when I pull it out of the water. Going over it, I'm actually surprised to see that there's no distortion to the dot from water being on the emitter or on the glass like it is here. So it is nice to see that it is going to work. I gently tap it off, primarily to see just if it would hold up, and it does just fine. I pulled off the battery compartment cover off camera, and there was no water inside, so at least that seal is doing its job.
From there, let's take a look, or rather a sound. Take a sound. Let's listen to these turrets. Can you hear that? It's actually a very well-defined positive click. And keep in mind, each click is 1 MOA. Now, this might be too coarse for many of you, but for a pistol that I'd probably be zeroing for like 15 or 20 yards, that's perfectly fine. Keep in mind, 1 click is an inch at 100 yards. So if you're talking about, let's say, 25 yards, a nice even number, each click is a 1/4 inch at 25 yards, which is more than fine enough. Just look at the action on this tool as we engage the next detent. That's actually fantastic. Way better than many of its rivals. A lot of them usually don't have any detents whatsoever. So you're going over here and you're making adjustments and you can't tell exactly what's going on. They usually, I'll pull this out. This is the Viper. Like look at the Viper by comparison, right? You have that tiny little regular head screw in there, and you're supposed to figure out what? It just doesn't work out. This thing doesn't sound anywhere near as good as this. The one thing I can say for the primary arms is it's just pretty simple, 2 little set screws, but still, this option from MidTen is already superior in that regard. Before we look at the reticle and the glass on this thing, the finish is actually pretty damn good. You can see the anodizing is nice and smooth. It passes the nail test with flying colors. You get a little bit of rub off, but guess what? You come over here and you can wipe it off with your finger and you have no residue left over. This is clearly a 3MOA dot for any of you wondering, and both controls are on the same side. That's one thing I really like about the 21mm Primarums Classic is the buttons are on opposite sides. So if you want to adjust it or shut it off, well, for that one you have to press both buttons simultaneously. But if you want to adjust it, it's easy to go up, down as opposed to up, down over here. Especially if you're trying to do it in a hurry, or you have gloves on, or you have a big fat old thumb like myself, you might not get that 100%. However, as you might have already heard, these have very good sound and feel to them. But you could see the pads are just elevated, so you could skim your finger across this and know that's one, that's the other. And again, they sound and feel awesome. Looking at the front, you can see we have a little bit of red tint going on. And it does have a pretty sizable dome shape going on, so I wonder how true to life this glass is going to look when we get behind it. And you can see the open emitter right there down at the bottom. There we go. We are lowering it, and we'll bring it all the way to its maximum. There it is. It's going to flash, letting us know we're at the top. And that's basically it. It's an open emitter pistol RDS. There's not a whole lot to it. Looking at it from the back, there is our dot. It does look a little bit bigger than 3MOA, but again, this is not set up 100%. And if I do our little shimmy shake on it, you'll see that the table underneath it is moving, but not a whole lot. And if I had to hazard a guess, the tint level on this thing is very, very low, which is something I am very happy to see. More often than not, there are a lot of manufacturers, get out of the way piece of paper, a lot of manufacturers have a lot of tint built into these, and for me, it just doesn't make that a whole lot of sense. Yes, I know typically the tint is there so this way you could pick up the dot a little bit easier, but sometimes the tint is so extreme that you don't really have the best idea of where your target is behind it. And so far, that's it. I gotta say, so far, I'm pretty impressed by the look and feel of this thing. I'm actually very excited to run this thing on a gun and see how it actually works. Another thing is this little hole that passes through. I'm sure if you wanted to, you could put like a toothpick in there to hopefully try to cover that up if you're not going to be using it for long term, or in case you lose your neoprene fitted cover. Anyway, with all that being said, let's get behind this thing and see what it's actually like to use.
I must be honest with you guys. So far, my initial impressions of this thing are very high, but there is something that I need to address, and it's not something that I've really noticed a problem with the exception of me trying to record with it. When I increase the shutter speed, the illuminator or the emitter starts to flash, and that's just because of the refresh rate from the LED that's producing the dot on the screen before you. MidTen says that they changed the hertz rating on it a little bit to elongate battery life. So, do you really notice that in person? Only if you're moving really, really fast. And I mean faster than you'd ever have to move a gun. You get a little bit of like what you'd consider rolling shutter with a camera, if you've ever seen that phenomenon. It almost looks like the light is bending a little bit. But even regular target shooting or transitioning between targets, I have not noticed it. With my gunplay indoors in my garage under very low light with my airsoft gun, I haven't noticed it at all. And actually mounted to a pistol outside in the sunlight, again, I haven't noticed it at all. So I can understand why they chose to go that route to increase battery life. But this does take a standard CR2032 battery, as you've seen, and it does have auto off, which works perfectly fine whether it's been 4 minutes or 14 hours. So I wouldn't worry about this thing's battery life being a problem. Increasing the shutter speed to about 1/400th of a second, you can see the flash appears. And as I go even faster on the shutter speed, the dot only seems to disappear more and more. But when I bring it to about 1/45th of a second, we have no problems looking through it. The dot itself is very nice and sharp, but it does seem larger than 3MOA. And when you get to its maximum brightness setting, it will flash to let you know that you're at its maximum. One thing that the keen viewer might notice is that when you're in too bright of a brightness setting in too dark of an environment, it will reflect back on the glass and show you the emitter box. This is something I've seen before, and it only really is noticeable when you're in too dark of an environment at too bright of a brightness setting. Beyond that, it's not noticeable. I really wanted to showcase the flash to you guys first because once we're outside looking at bright sunny days, the shutter speed is going to be a little bit too fast for the emitter to keep up, so thus it's going to be flashing. I had emailed MidTen immediately when I discovered this, seeing if it was something wrong with the optic itself, but they said that it's something that they noticed as well. It's just the way it is with the hertz rate or the refresh rate on the emitter. So instead, don't look primarily at the dot here at our rooftop segment. Instead, just focus on the glass, the brightness, the clarity, the size, and the distortion, which is what I'm trying to showcase. Against those power lines there at 31 yards, there's very minimal distortion to this thing. And the tint levels, like I had already tried to showcase on the tabletop, is very, very low, which is something that I'm a big fan of. I do wonder, however, if they introduced more tint to the glass, if they'd be able to tweak the hertz rating a little bit and have the emitter not do what it's currently doing. But again, to the naked eye, it is a bright, solid red dot and works perfectly fine. When you're holding this optic in hand, the perimeter around the glass seems thick and bulky, but when you get behind it, such as you see here, it really doesn't seem that obtrusive. And honestly, it almost melts away to nothing. To further illustrate the quality of the glass on this thing, I pair it with my Holosun HM3X to showcase to you that when you're looking through this thing, it almost looks like there's nothing in front of the magnifier except a floating, blinking, and unfortunately in this case, red dot. However, if the blinking is annoying, we will take again another freeze frame and focus on the photo a little bit more in depthly. The image to this thing, both the magnifier and the red dot, are both exceptional. The tearing to the red dot itself we've seen before, like I have said, on multiple different Holosun products, but here, to the naked eye, it doesn't seem that bad. I still have an astigmatism, and you know what? The dot seems very sharp, though it does seem a little bit larger than 3MOA, like I had mentioned earlier. Beyond that, I truthfully have no real qualms about this thing. And if you're wondering if the emitter will disappear when you get too close to the edge of the glass, well, here's a little showcase of that, showing you that it's not going to happen with this little sight. It really is very well made for the $175 that it costs. Well, don't forget my 20% discount code from MidTen if you do decide to get one of these things. And as for myself, would I spend the money on it? I'll get a little ahead of myself because we're nowhere near my final thoughts. I wouldn't mind giving this thing a shot. Yeah, it doesn't have any cool features like the solar panels found on most Holosuns, nor does it have a guaranteed great warranty like Vortex or Primary Arms, but I wouldn't necessarily discount this thing 100% and cross it off my list without giving it a shot. I will eventually test out MidTen's warranty work without going through them directly through my contacts for this channel, just to see if they are as good as they say that they are. But if their warranty work proves to be as good as this thing is so far built and performs, then I'd be impressed. I found no problems getting behind this thing rather quickly. And here indoors, you can see just how bright that dot gets. It gets more than bright enough to be seen very clearly and legibly out in bright sunny weather, and when you're indoors on a slightly dimmer environment, it gets too bright at its maximum brightness setting. Looking at from the front, that emitter is way, way, way bright, and thus, like I had mentioned very briefly in the unboxing segment, the brightness actually reflects back from the glass onto the emitter box, and you can see the outline of it. Stepping it down, however, completely mitigates that problem. I found that there were about 4, maybe 5 brightness settings that were completely usable outside, and the rest of the 11 overall brightness settings were great for anything less than very bright environments. Here I'm in the middle or so of the pack, which they claim is going to have about a 40 or 50,000 hour battery life, and if that's true to form, then I'd be very, very impressed. But I do believe that because this thing does have auto off, that it would perform even better than that. And guess what? If the battery dies, you don't have to worry about unmounting this off of your pistol because you do have that nice side-loading battery compartment. I only just recently got my pistol license, so I don't have any footage of me shooting this thing on my actual pistol just yet, but that'll be coming very soon. Getting behind this thing and actually running it hard is very easy. The perimeter around the glass is a lot smaller than you might think. The window is a very good size, and I kind of like the octagonal shape. The lack of distortion, the bright, sharp center dot, and the lack of screen blue tinting that you see on some optics is a very welcome thing indeed. And it makes shooting down here absolute breeze. I have a new pistol on its way, which will be optic ready, and I do plan on throwing this on it for real hard, heavy-duty testing. I like it that much. It'll be more of a range, comp / home defense duty gun, and one that I plan on putting many, many rounds through. So that'll be a really good test to see if this thing will hold up. Now let's get into some side-by-side comparisons, and the first is going to be with the Burris FF3. This was filmed very early on in my YouTube career, if I can call it that just yet, but it still holds up very well in today's standards. You can find these for around $220. They have a single button design, they come with a pig mount, they have a very small perimeter around the glass. The glass is, as you could see, low distortion and fairly low tint, though not as little tint as what we see here on the MidTen. To my knowledge, the FF3 has a pretty good track record, and you can find them for pretty good prices used. But if you're buying it new, keep in mind with the discount that MidTen's offering on this thing, it's about $80 more expensive still. So if you're on a really tight budget, it's something to definitely take into consideration. Dredging up another pistol-mounted red dot that I had reviewed very, very long time ago, it is the original Holosun 507. I kind of enjoyed the 507, but you could see there is much more distortion with the glass looking at the back part of the berm, and the window around it seems to be even more restrictive and smaller than what we see here with the MidTen. The Holosons are definitely feature-packed, but they also have a feature-packed price point of at least $300. Let me now introduce a newer Holosun product that I more recently reviewed, which is the Holosun SCS, which was sent to me in by arftac.com. Use discount code CDOES to get, I think it was 10% off all their optics orders, but I could be mistaken. Definitely check out their website and find out more information. Now, the Holosun SCS is basically just for a Glock MOS. So if you're running a Glock and you have an MOS system, this is an option that would greatly behoove you to do some research on. I really like it. It's titanium. It's extremely well built. Feels very robust, but it is a much smaller optic than what we see here again with the MidTen. But again, you might be looking for something on the smaller side. So if you can run an adapter plate to run an MOS on your pistol, or you have an MOS pistol already, that is a very clear good option for you. But just keep in mind, Holosuns are notorious for having a little bit more tint to them and a little bit more distortion than some of their competitors. Granted, the SCS is very, very tiny, so it's a little bit harder to squeeze out really good performance out of such a small package. But if you want to watch an optic review that has a really good performance in a really small package, check out the Primary Arms Classic 21mm. I don't compare it against this thing simply because the MidTen is much more of a full-sized optic for a full-sized gun. However, I will compare it to the Primary Arms Classic 24mm, which is also going to be the closest in price point to this thing, coming in at around $150. A couple of the key differences between the Primary Arms and the MidTen are going to be battery placement. The battery on the Primary Arms is bottom mount. The buttons, however, are the same, and the window sizes are roughly the same, though I would give the edge to the MidTen. However, the Primary Arms comes backed with Primary Arms' amazing warranty, and as you can very clearly see, comes with a very sharp, bright red dot and very clear, tint-free, bright glass. Though, if you do dance around with the optic in front of your line of sight, it seems like the Primary Arms has a little bit more parallax to the image, but it's not what I would consider an absolute deal breaker, especially if you are looking for that particular optic. They also come in a little bit lighter than the MidTen, and that guaranteed warranty is very sweet. Ultimately, though, it's going to come down to you and your personal preference of what you're looking for on a pistol-mounted RDS. Those are just some comparisons to showcase you how well this thing performs against some of its rivals, even some that are twice the price. So, this thing performs, in my opinion, very well for the $140-ish that it'll cost you if you use my discount code below. But getting into my final thoughts, I have to say they're already very high, despite the fact that when the shutter speed is wrong on the camera or too high, it flashes. But I also have to think quite highly of MidTen as a company, because they're willing to send in an optic to me for a brutally honest review and put it out there to the public to see firsthand. But there hasn't been not one thing that I haven't disclosed with you in this video that has been part of my personal experience with running this ever since I got it from MidTen. Everything that's happened, you have been told. And I plan on still having that be the case when I run this on my gun when it comes in. I do plan on running this on my comp gun / home defense gun for a few hundred rounds to see if it'll hold up to the rigors and abuse of actual wear and tear. Because if it can, then this is a very good option for many of you out there that are trying to get into, optics like this on a budget. $140 is what I would consider to be on the lower end of a pistol-mounted RDS. And the fact that this thing at least comes with the options that it does, namely a side-mount battery compartment and auto-off, auto-on, is a real plus. The Primary Arms Classics are two really nice RDSs as well, but they come in a little more expensive, about $10 more, but they are backed with a great warranty, but they don't have auto-off, and their batteries are mounted underneath. It seems like, yet again, we have a give and take. If you want more, you got to spend a lot more. If you want less, you're going to get a lot less. The overall construction, fit, and finish on this thing are very high, and my uses behind it so far have been nothing but pleasurable. And we'll see if that still remains the case in a couple of weeks when I get a couple hundred rounds through this thing and really beat the ever-loving shit out of it. Expect to see that probably the next couple of months because I have to wait for my pistol to go on my license, which in the great state of New York can sometimes take way too long. I do need to thank MidTen for sending this optic in for review, but I truly need to thank all of you, my viewers, first, because without you, my channel wouldn't be as big as it is, and companies like MidTen wouldn't notice me. So, thank you all very much for watching. And as always, see you again next time. And a huge thank you to my Patreon providers and my Subscribe Star subscribers. Without you, this truly wouldn't be possible. If you'd like to support my channel but don't want to join either of those, I completely understand. But you could still help by using my affiliate links in the description below, and or like, share, and subscribe as always. Again, thank you very much.